I only needed shelter, but this forgotten theater had been waiting for my hands.
She was 23 and broke. No savings, no apartment, no job. Just a paper bag and $7 she had kept after selling her last sketchbook and walking away from the city. And with that $7, she bought a forgotten marionette maker's theatre hidden in Queens County, New York, in the year 1998 when the old venue vanished from maps and records. The roof leaked through 3 rooms. The walls carried decades of damp. Queens County officials had condemned the property in 2024 and scheduled demolition for the following spring after winter crews cleared the site. But inside the massive walnut control bar of the largest marionette, a sealed wooden compartment waited untouched for 80 years, holding money and a manuscript that would change the course of Cora's life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Cora Whitmore had been drawing movement her whole life without knowing it. When she was a child, Cora spent afternoons watching ordinary things move, a curtain lifting beside an open window, the slow turn of a ceiling fan, the careful steps of pigeons along a rooftop ledge. She filled school notebooks with tiny figures in motion, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to understand the quiet space between one movement and the next. Her father Daniel repaired old clocks in a narrow workshop behind their apartment. He taught her that every object carried evidence of the hands that shaped it. He never rushed a repair. He would place each small screw in a white dish and tell her that patience was part of the craft, not a delay before the craft began. The person who changed Cora's understanding of making things was her grandfather's sister, Eleanor Voss, a retired marionette maker who lived above a closed theatre on a forgotten street in Brooklyn. Every Saturday morning, Cora climbed 3 wooden staircases to Eleanor's workshop. They cleaned tools, selected pieces of basswood, and studied old puppets that had performed before either of them was born. Eleanor taught her how a marionette's fingers were carved from soft basswood, how tiny leather joints allowed a wooden wrist to turn naturally, and how balance mattered more than decoration. She showed Cora the control bars she had built by hand, each one shaped differently depending on the character it guided. The hand follows the heart, but the hand must learn the wood. Cora carried those words because Eleanor never meant them as a simple lesson about carving. She meant that a person could not force life into something. The work had to begin with listening. When Eleanor died, the old workshop was closed within a month. The family sold most of the equipment, believing the craft belonged to another time. Cora kept only a worn carving knife and a small wooden joint Eleanor had made during her final winter. The larger collection of patterns, tools, and unfinished marionettes disappeared into storage. Years later, Cora joined a successful animation company in Manhattan. She believed she had found a modern version of the same work. She drew characters, studied movement, and spent long nights refining expressions that would later appear on screens. Then the company changed. The new director arrived with polished shoes, quiet meetings, and a habit of closing doors before difficult conversations. The artists were told that production would become more efficient. Their drawings, their revisions, and their years of experience were reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. Cora watched her department disappear, one desk at a time. The director never raised his voice. That made the decisions feel colder. He spoke about progress, savings, and adaptation while the people who built the characters packed their belongings into cardboard boxes. Cora lasted until the final week. On a rainy Tuesday morning, she found her access card disabled. Her desk was already cleared. The small wooden joint from Eleanor's workshop was missing because security had packed it with the remaining office items. 6 days later, her landlord stood outside her apartment with a clipboard and avoided looking directly at her. The door opened only halfway. Behind him, Cora saw her mother's old blue coat hanging beside the entrance. The same coat she had worn when Cora was young. "You need to leave by Friday morning." Those were the only words spoken. Cora waited for her mother to say something. Her mother looked down at the floor, then quietly stepped back into the apartment. The door closed with a soft click. That sound stayed with Cora longer than the eviction itself. For 6 weeks, she moved through the edges of cities. She slept 2 nights in a 24-hour laundromat in Newark, then spent 4 nights on a friend's basement floor in Jersey City before the arrangement ended. She sat through cold mornings at Penn Station with a backpack under her knees and watched commuters hurry past, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Her money became smaller each week. First there was $48, then $23, then $12. The final $7 remained folded inside the back pocket of her sketchbook because spending it felt like admitting there was nothing left. In early January, Cora entered a public library in Queens simply to escape the wind. She sat at a computer near the back wall and searched old property listings, mostly without expecting anything. That was when she found the advertisement. The listing was not written to attract buyers. It was a county notice about abandoned creative properties scheduled for clearance. Most people had ignored it because the building was damaged, the records were incomplete, and the only offer accepted would be a symbolic payment. At the bottom of the page was one sentence: "Historic Marionette Makers Theatre available for transfer, $7. Cora read it 3 times. The photograph showed a dark building with boarded windows and a faded sign. She recognized the shape of the workshop entrance immediately. It looked like the kind of place Eleanor would have understood. The next morning, Cora folded the notice and placed it beside Eleanor's old wooden joint. She did not know if she was buying a building, a memory, or a mistake. But for the first time in weeks, she was moving towards something instead of away from everything. And the theatre waiting at the end of that road still held the one thing nobody had found. The bus left Manhattan before sunrise. Cora sat beside the window with her backpack on her knees and watched the buildings slowly thin into warehouses, then smaller streets, then stretches of winter trees standing bare against a pale sky. She carried only what she could lift: 2 sweaters, a notebook, Eleanor's wooden joint wrapped in cloth, and the folded county notice that had become heavier each time she touched it. The ride lasted several hours. By the time she reached the final stop, the temperature had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The driver told her the local route had been reduced for the season, so Cora stepped onto the roadside with her bag and began walking the remaining miles. She walked 6 miles, near evening. With snow beginning to cover the shoulders of the road, she found an abandoned hay barn behind a field fence. The owner had left a small side door unlatched, and Cora spent the night on old straw beneath a wooden beam marked with faded numbers from another season. She woke before dawn with frost along the edge of her backpack. The cold had not made her leave. It had only reminded her that she had already survived colder things. The town appeared slowly the next morning. It was not the kind of place that announced itself. There was no large sign, no welcoming entrance. There were only old brick buildings, narrow streets, and people who seemed to know exactly where they were going. Cora passed 5 businesses before reaching the county office: Bell & Sons Hardware with its painted wooden sign, Maple Street Cafe with fogged windows, Hartley Dry Goods beside the corner pharmacy, the small Mercer feed store, and a repair shop where bicycles hung from the ceiling above the front door. The town had the quiet rhythm of a place built by people who repaired things instead of replacing them. The county clerk's office occupied the 2nd floor of an older municipal building. The stairs creaked beneath her boots. A brass plate beside the door read "Property Records." Inside, the room smelled of paper, dust, and old wood polish. A woman behind the desk looked up from a stack of documents. She had silver hair pinned tightly behind her head, a small scar near her left eyebrow, and a nameplate that read, Margaret Ellis, County Clerk. You are here about the Marionette theatre transfer. Cora nodded. Margaret opened a folder. I need you to understand something before we complete this. Yes, ma'am. The property has no working electricity. Yes, ma'am. The roof has damage, and the county will not provide repair assistance. Yes, ma'am. The building has been marked for removal if restoration does not begin according to the agreement. Yes, ma'am. Margaret studied her for a moment. You understand what you are accepting? Yes, ma'am. The answer seemed too simple, but Margaret did not challenge it. She removed a document from the folder and placed it on the desk. The deed was thin, almost fragile. The transfer amount looked unusual written beside the property information. $7. Margaret pressed a brass stamp into red ink and placed it carefully beside the signature line. The sound was small, but it marked ownership. After Cora signed, Margaret folded the papers and looked again at the name. Whitmore. Cora looked up. Yes. The clerk touched the page lightly. I knew that name once. Cora waited. Margaret turned toward a shelf filled with old records. Eleanor Voss. The name felt like a door opening. She was your mentor? Cora nodded slowly. Margaret removed her glasses. She used to bring her marionettes here during the summer festivals, before the theatre closed. She made everything by hand. The town thought the work was old-fashioned. Cora looked at the papers between them. What happened to her? She waited for someone younger to care about the craft. Margaret closed the folder. I suppose she found someone. The directions were written on a county map. Follow Willow Creek Road for 2 miles. Turn onto Old Mill Lane. Continue past the Walnut Grove. The property sits behind the abandoned orchard. Margaret handed her the map. One neighbour still lives nearby. Thomas Bell. He has a dog named Arthur. If the dog does not like you, Thomas usually does not either. Cora smiled faintly. It was the first almost smile she had made in weeks. The walk took another hour. Old Mill Lane was narrow, with frozen grass rising through cracks along the edges. The walnut trees stood beside the road like they had been waiting through every season. Their branches were empty, but the trunks remained thick and steady. Halfway there, a brown dog approached the fence line. It watched Cora carefully. Then it wagged its tail. An older man appeared from a nearby shed. Arthur does not usually trust strangers. I'm glad he changed his mind. The man looked toward the theatre in the distance. You bought that place? Cora nodded. He removed his gloves. Then you bought a lot of quiet. The building stood at the end of the path. It was smaller than Cora expected. The theatre was approximately 30 feet wide and 40 feet deep, with dark wooden siding, a steep roof covered in missing shingles, and a narrow brick chimney leaning slightly toward the east. A faded sign hung above the entrance, Voss Marionette Theatre. The letters were almost gone. Inside the front room, the air was cold enough to sting her hands. Dust moved through thin beams of light coming through gaps in the boards. The smell of old wood mixed with damp fabric and something faintly sweet, like forgotten varnish. The back room was darker. Her boots pressed into layers of dust. Her fingers touched the wall and felt rough plaster beneath peeling paint. Somewhere above her, a loose wire tapped against a beam whenever the wind moved. There were shapes hanging in the darkness, wooden faces, broken strings, silent figures waiting above the floor. Cora did not stay long that first evening. She made a small sleeping area near the front wall using her coat and the blanket from her bag. She placed Eleanor's wooden joint beside her. The building settled around her through the night. Every sound was unfamiliar. Every sound was also proof that the place was still standing. She closed her eyes beneath the damaged roof, listening to the old theatre breathe. Some things look like small gestures and turn out to be everything. The first 3 days were measured by small discoveries. Cora learned that the well behind the theatre still worked if the handle was pulled slowly. She learned the old outhouse door needed to be lifted slightly before it would close. She learned that the third floorboard near the front entrance gave a soft crack before the others, and the loose board beside the back wall answered with a deeper sound. The building spoke in its own language. She began writing the sounds down, not because she believed the theatre was alive, but because Eleanor had taught her that every craft began with observation. On the 4th morning, Cora walked into town carrying a list of supplies written on the back of the county map. She entered Bell Sons Hardware. The owner stood behind the counter wearing a faded green apron with one missing button. His left hand was wrapped around a wooden handle he was repairing, and his right thumb was stained permanently dark from years of working with oil and metal. "Thomas Bell?" Cora asked. The man looked up. "That depends who is asking." "Cora Whitmore. I bought the theatre." The room became quiet for a moment. Thomas placed the handle down carefully. "Then you will need tools." "I know." "No. You need the right tools." The store smelled of cedar shelves, iron nails, and coffee that had been sitting too long beside the register. Thomas walked through the aisles without hurry, choosing items as if he already knew what the building needed. When Cora reached the counter, she counted the money she had left. Thomas looked at the amount. "Open a credit account." "I cannot pay yet." "I did not say you could." Cora looked confused. "I said open one." He placed a thin booklet on the counter. It was an old repair manual. "The previous owner left this here years ago. Take it." Cora touched the cover. "Why?" Thomas shrugged. "Because someone gave me one when I needed it." The first supplies were simple. A chimney brush, $9. A box of masonry nails, $6. Lime mortar, $14. Cotton gloves, $4. Sandpaper, $3. A small wire brush, $2. Thomas did not give her a speech about rebuilding. He simply helped carry the supplies outside. The chimney became the first true test. The bricks were soft from years of moisture. When Cora scraped away the damaged mortar, it fell in pale powder between her fingers. She spent 2 mornings removing loose creosote from inside the flue with a long brush. A metal scraper, and more patience than strength. The work took 12 hours spread across several cold days. She learned where the old smoke had travelled. She learned which bricks could remain and which had already surrendered. On the 7th evening, she rebuilt the damaged sections using fresh mortar and waited. Not every repair announces itself immediately. Some repairs only reveal their strength when something tries to break them again. The first fire was built on a Sunday afternoon. Cora placed small pieces of dry wood beneath larger logs, exactly the way Eleanor had shown her years before. She opened the damper slowly and watched the smoke. For several minutes. Nothing happened. Then the smoke rose cleanly. The room warmed by degrees. Cora made her first hot meal inside the theatre that night. It was only soup heated over the repaired stove, but she ate slowly, sitting at a wooden table that had probably held hundreds of meals before her. The workroom remained untouched until the following week. She opened the door carefully. Inside were fewer treasures than she expected, and more meaning than she could count. A half-carved basswood figure rested beside a dull knife. A box of leather strips sat beneath a shelf. A bundle of unfinished control strings remained tied with faded blue thread. A wooden mould for shaping small joints leaned against the wall. A cracked mirror stood beside a costume cabinet, and in the corner was a large marionette frame covered by a cloth that had once been white. Cora did not remove everything. She had learned enough from Eleanor to know that old things needed to be approached slowly. She cleaned one table, then another. 3 days later, while moving the large Marionette frame, she heard something unusual. A sound beneath the wood, not a creak. A hollow answer. She stopped. Cora tapped the control bar again. The sound returned. She turned the piece over and examined the surface. The walnut wood was dark and smooth, with careful hand marks around the joints. It looked like an ordinary control bar, but the weight felt wrong. Too light. She measured it against another bar. The difference was small, but it was there. At the end of the handle, she found a thin cedar disc fitted into the wood. It had no reason to exist, not unless someone wanted to hide something. Cora sat at the work table and removed the disc slowly. Behind it was a narrow opening. Inside were 3 wrapped packages. The first contained tools, not modern tools. Old carving tools with handles worn smooth by decades of use. Each blade had been protected with cloth and oil. The second package held raw material, small pieces of basswood, leather strips, fine wire, a bundle of carefully preserved strings. The third package was a small tin box. Cora opened it only after cleaning the outside. Inside were coins, folded papers, and a military medal. She counted everything twice. The total was $41,900. There were silver dollars dated 1923, half dollars from the 1930s, Liberty quarters, and older Indian head pennies collected over several decades. The medal belonged to a soldier named Samuel Voss. The year engraved beneath the name was 1944. Cora did not celebrate. She did not rush to imagine what the money could buy. She simply sat there with the box open, surrounded by tools that had waited longer than she had been alive. The letter remained folded beneath the coins. She could see Eleanor's handwriting on the outside, but she did not open it that night. Instead, she carried the tin box outside and sat near the frozen creek behind the theatre. The water moved beneath a thin layer of ice. The trees stood silent. For the first time in many months, Cora had something valuable in her hands, and she understood that value was not always the same thing as ownership. She stayed outside until the light disappeared. Some things look like small gestures and turn out to be everything. The next morning, Cora carried the letter to the front room before sunrise. The handwriting was unmistakable. She had seen it on old notes tucked inside Eleanor's workshop drawers, on small instructions beside unfinished carvings, and once on a birthday card that smelled faintly of cedar. The ink had faded in places, but the careful shapes of the letters remained steady. Cora sat at the wooden table. She opened the folded paper along its original creases. The first words were written slowly. "My dear one, whoever you are, I do not know your name, your age, or the road that brought you to this room. I only know that you found what I left behind, and if you're reading this, then the hands that built this theatre have finally reached someone willing to listen. My name is Eleanor Voss. I was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1931. My mother, Cora Voss, was born in 1903 in Queens and learned wood carving from her father, Samuel Voss, who was born in 1872 in Albany. Samuel learned the marionette trade from his father, Thomas Voss, who arrived in New York in 1846 after leaving a small village in Germany. 4 generations of our family shaped wood, repaired broken joints, and built figures that carried stories across stages. I write this because our craft was never only about making objects. It was about giving movement to something that appeared silent. In 1988, I closed the theatre for the final time. The exact date was October 14th, 1988. I locked the doors after the last performance and placed the control bars in their cases. I believed someone would return sooner. More than 30 years passed. Silence has a way of becoming permanent if nobody interrupts it. My husband, Samuel, was lost during the Korean War in 1952. He was buried far from the city where we began our life together. After his death, I raised my son Daniel and continued the workshop because I believed work could carry a person through grief. If you are repairing this place, remember these things. For basswood carving, keep the room near 65 degrees Fahrenheit so the wood does not split while shaping. When preparing hide glue, use a ratio of 1 part glue granules to 2 parts water and allow it to rest overnight before heating. For leather joints, soften the leather for 15 minutes before cutting, because stiff material will fail where movement begins. When balancing a marionette, the weight in the feet must be measured carefully. Too much weight removes grace, and too little removes control. Do not hurry. A puppet is not alive because of the strings. It is alive because someone cared enough to understand every small connection. I have watched many people search for inheritance in money, buildings, and names. But inheritance is not what remains untouched. Inheritance is the work someone trusted you to continue. The money hidden here was never meant to make anyone wealthy. It was meant to protect the tools, the materials, and the possibility that this room would one day hear footsteps again. If you found this place during a difficult season of your own life, then perhaps you already understand something I learned late. We are all shaped by forces we cannot see. The hand believes it controls the puppet. Sometimes the world is the hand moving us, but there is still a choice in how we move. Use what I left behind with care. Teach someone else. Repair what can be repaired. Leave something better than you found it. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Eleanor Voss, October 14th, 1988. Cora read the letter twice. The second time, she noticed details she had missed before. The slight pressure of the pen. The places where Eleanor had paused. The uneven line near the signature where her hand had probably grown tired. When she finished, Cora folded the paper exactly along the original creases. Not because she wanted to preserve it untouched, because she understood that some things deserved respect before use. She walked through the back door carrying the letter. Behind the theatre, near the walnut trees, she found the marker Eleanor had described. It was not large. Just a simple stone set into the earth beside the old workshop path. The name carved into it was Samuel Voss. Cora stood there for a long time. She did not speak. She only placed her hand on the stone and let the morning pass. When she returned inside, she cleaned Eleanor's old brass lantern and placed a candle inside. The flame was small, but it filled the room. Over the next weeks, the theatre changed because people noticed small things. Margaret Ellis from the county office brought old records she had saved from the archive. Thomas Bell returned with repaired hinges and never mentioned the unpaid account. Arthur, the hardware owner's old dog, began sleeping outside the theatre door during afternoon repairs, and the cafe owner, Doris, left warm paper bags on the porch whenever she saw smoke coming from the chimney. Nobody made announcements. Nobody called it a restoration. It was simply people helping where they could. There are small kindnesses that stay with us long after we forget the exact day they happened. Think about one you received. Perhaps it was a stranger who helped when you were tired, a neighbour who showed up quietly, or someone who offered patience when you had little left to give. What was that small kindness you still remember? Cora kept the heirloom tools beside her bed that night. The letter rested beneath them. The theatre remained cold in some corners. The roof still needed work. The walls still carried years of damage. But for the first time since she arrived, Cora slept without feeling like she was waiting to leave. The first real snow arrived on December 3rd, 2024. 6 inches covered the theatre roof overnight. Cora stood outside with the repair manual open beneath her coat and watched snow slide through the damaged sections. She read Eleanor's roofing chapter 3 times before touching a single tool. The roof was not a surface. It was a system. The old measurements showed the main slope was roughly 12 feet by 40 feet. Cora calculated that she needed 32 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of felt underlayment, and nearly 3,000 roofing nails to complete the damaged sections without replacing the entire structure. Thomas Bell checked her numbers. Then he disappeared into the back room of his hardware store. When he returned, he carried an old roofing hatchet with a worn wooden handle. "My uncle used this." Cora looked at the tool. "I cannot pay for it." Thomas shook his head. "I did not ask." The next morning, Harold Avery arrived. He was a 70-year-old former roofer with a white mustache and a habit of measuring everything twice before touching it once. He refused payment before Cora could offer. "I am not working for money," he said. "Then why?" Harold looked at the damaged roof. "Because someone should finish what someone started." For 11 days. They worked. They replaced damaged boards, aligned sister rafters, stretched chalk lines, and set each shingle with careful spacing. Harold showed Cora the 3-stroke nail technique. 1 firm strike to set the nail. Phone. Plick. And 1 light finishing tap that protected the wood. "That nail's proud." Cora looked at the raised edge. "Pull it." The roof was finished in mid-December. The first night afterward, snow fell again. Nothing leaked. For Cora, that was enough. The chimney required more patience than the roof. Several bricks had begun spalling from repeated freezes. The mortar between them had turned into powder, falling away whenever Cora touched it. She removed the damaged sections carefully and rebuilt them using hydraulic lime mixed with fire clay at a ratio of 3 parts lime to 1 part clay. The work continued for 3 weeks. Temperatures stayed in the 20s Fahrenheit. Every 15 minutes, Cora stopped to warm her hands because the cold stone made her fingers lose feeling. She kept working in small sections because rushing would only create another failure later. The old chimney had survived storms, but survival was not the same as strength. It needed care. Near the end of January, she built the first test fire. She watched the flame. She watched the smoke. Nothing pushed back into the room. The chimney drew clean. Cora sat beside the fire until the last ember faded. The floors were hidden beneath years of dust, stains, and silence. When Cora lifted the first damaged board, she found white pine planks beneath the surface, held together with hand-cut rosehead nails. The wood was worth saving. She rented a random orbit sander from Thomas's store, $14 per day. The work moved slowly. The first pass used 80 grit paper to remove the deepest marks. The second used 120 grit to smooth the grain. The final pass used 220 grit until the old pine felt almost soft beneath her fingertips. Cora applied 3 coats of oil. Each coat needed 48 hours to cure. The colour changed gradually. What had looked almost black beneath the dust became a warm shade between dark honey and mahogany. One morning, Cora woke ready to work and found she could not begin. She walked outside instead. Near the marsh behind the theatre, a great blue heron stood perfectly still beside the water. The bird waited for nearly an hour. So did she. Cora did no repairs that day. Some work happened through action. Some work happened through stopping. The windows were the final winter battle. There were 8 in total. 3 had no glass remaining. 4 had cracks spreading across the panes. 1 was different. The original pane from 1788 was still intact. Cora cleaned around it carefully and decided it would remain exactly where it was. For the replacements, she used traditional DAP 33 glazing putty, pressing the material into the frame with a putty knife at a shallow angle. The sash cords required equal care. She installed 1/4-inch cotton cord through the pulley channels and tied each counterweight with a figure-8 knot so the windows would rise evenly without pulling sideways. The last window took the longest, not because it was damaged, because Cora wanted to remember it. When she finished securing the frame, she stepped back. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It stayed there for several seconds, looking through the clean glass. Then it flew away. Cora returned to her tools. The theatre was still unfinished. But it was no longer forgotten. The walls revealed their age slowly. Behind the damaged sections, Cora found hand-split oak lath covered with remnants of horsehair plaster. The old material had lasted for generations, but 3 patches near the chimney had failed completely. Thomas Bell found an old bag of preserved horsehair in the back of his warehouse. Your grandfather would have used this. Cora mixed fresh lime plaster and added the horsehair carefully, letting the fibres strengthen the mixture instead of making it heavy. The first coat was scored so the next layer would hold. The second was a 3/8-inch brown coat that needed 72 hours before it could be touched. The final coat was only 1/8 inch thick, pressed smooth with slow, even movements. Cora repaired the wall where smoke stains had once spread. She ran her hand across the finished surface. "These patches will hold another 100 years," she said it quietly. Not as a promise, as a hope. The theatre became known by the people who quietly passed through it. Doris from Maple Street Cafe had flour permanently caught in the lines of her hands and always wore a small silver pin shaped like a leaf. Every Thursday morning, She left paper bags on the doorstep. Inside were bread, soup, and sometimes a piece of pie. Cora tried to pay her. Doris refused. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." She never explained what she meant. She did not need to. A few days later, Caleb arrived on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul tied across the back. He was 17 and still growing into his work boots. "I heard you needed wood. I can pay you." He shook his head. My mother said, "About your grandfather." Cora looked at the maul. What did she say? Caleb rested his hand on the handle. That he fixed things nobody else bothered to fix. Then he unloaded the wood. Reverend Boyd never entered the theatre. He simply walked past each morning on his way toward the old church. He was a thin man with a dark coat worn shiny at the elbows. Every morning, he tipped his hat. Every morning, he stopped for exactly 1 moment. Then he offered the same 4-word prayer. "May your hands endure," and he kept walking. Cora postponed the cellar until February 11th. The ground was finally stable enough. Beneath the theatre, she uncovered a 12 by 15-foot fieldstone floor and 7 granite steps descending into the earth. At the center of the cellar was a dressed granite slab. A small craft mark had been carved into its surface. Cora cleaned around it. She did not lift it. Some doors were meant to remain closed until the right time. While checking the 3rd step, she noticed something wedged beneath the stone edge. A small oak box. Inside was a brass key. The bow of the key was shaped like the symbol Eleanor had used on her earliest marionette designs. Cora carried it upstairs. The second object was a tintype photograph. It showed a young woman standing outside the same cottage in 1903. She held a carving tool. The face was older, different in many ways, but the resemblance stopped Cora. The woman looked strangely familiar. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Cora Voss, daughter of Samuel Voss, age 25, summer of 1903. Cora placed the photograph beside the key. She did not search for what the key opened. It remained on the mantel, waiting. By March, the snow began to retreat. The creak grew louder. The walnut trees developed small green catkins. Cora walked the property each morning before starting work. She decided not to begin full marionette production that spring. The tools were ready. The room was ready. She was not. Instead, she spent 1 coin from the hidden collection on materials and practiced with small pieces of wood. Tiny joints. Simple shapes. Patient movements. The theatre did not demand that she hurry. It had already waited decades. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Cora placed her first completed heritage craft object on the old theatre table. It was not a grand piece. It was a small wooden bird with movable wings, carved from basswood taken from the original workshop supply. The joints were precise. The balance was gentle. When Cora moved the control bar, the wings lifted naturally, not because the wood was forced, but because every connection had been respected. She kept it in the room where Eleanor had taught her. The restored theatre was never made perfect. It became something better. The roof held through storms. The chimney warmed the front room. The floors carried footsteps again. The old windows let winter light enter without letting winter take over. The broken theatre had become a place where careful work continued. The answer to the brass key came in the following spring. Cora returned to the walnut grove behind the property and noticed a small metal plate hidden beneath the oldest tree's bark. The brass key fit. Inside the narrow compartment was a folded 48-star American flag and a note wrapped in cloth. The handwriting belonged to Cora Voss, The date was written at the top, June 6, 1918. During the final year of the First World War, Clara had written about her brother Samuel, who had gone overseas and never returned home. She wrote that the flag was not a symbol of loss, but a reminder that every person carried a story beyond what others could see. The medal from the tin box was later honored at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn on Memorial Day, May 26, 2025, during a quiet visit with only a few people present. There was no ceremony, no announcement, only a name remembered. Cora never spent the hidden money on herself. She used 3 coins. One paid for rare carving blades. One purchased replacement leather for marionette joints. One bought wood from a local supplier who still harvested fallen trees responsibly. The rest remained sealed in the tin box. On the lid, Cora wrote, for the next one, the theatre reopened quietly. No newspaper articles. No grand opening. Doris placed a handwritten index card on the cafe corkboard. Traditional marionette workshop accepting visitors by appointment. Within months, more than 40 names appeared on the mailing list. People came to learn. People came to watch. People came because they remembered what it felt like when something made by hand still mattered. One autumn afternoon, Caleb returned. He was taller. His hands were rougher. He carried a wooden sign carved from walnut. It read, Daughters. Cora held the sign for a long time. The words were simple, but they changed something. The old craft had survived because people passed it forward, not because one person saved it alone. That evening, Cora sat at Eleanor's old desk and began writing her own letter. The first words were familiar. My dear one, whoever you are. She wrote about the theatre, about the people who helped, about the mistakes she made, about the repairs that mattered most. And she wrote that someday another person might find this place during a difficult season and wonder whether they belonged there. Near the end of the letter, she wrote the sentence Eleanor had left behind. Some things look like small gestures and turn out to be everything. The theatre continued quietly. The tools remained on the workbench. The lantern still burned each evening. The old marionettes no longer hung like forgotten figures in darkness. They waited in repaired rooms, surrounded by hands willing to learn. A marionette maker's theatre waits. It has always waited. Years later, the $7 bill Cora carried from the beginning remained inside Margaret Ellis's old county clerk desk drawer. The clerk kept it beneath a stack of property records, not because it was valuable, because it proved something simple. Sometimes the smallest amount is enough to open a door that has been waiting for someone to walk through. Script complete. Total approximately 37,900 characters.